Put God first.
Your presence in their lives gives them validation.
Our children don't need us to be superheroes.
If you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today.
Men, stand up, be fathers.
Welcome to the Inspired Legacy Podcast, Season 1, Episode 5. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Henderson, your host and founder of the Inspired Legacy. Our mission is to celebrate the gift of fatherhood and equip men to lead boldly, love unconditionally, and leave a lasting legacy with the belief that we can change the world one dad at a time. In today's episode, I chat with my good friend Tamien Dysart. I've known Tamien for several years. We go to church together, and he's an active business leader here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where we both live. But Tamien and I, we share a common past in the fact that we both became fathers at a very early age. In this episode, we talk about what it was like for him to experience fatherhood at a young age, very young age of 17, and what measures he took to persevere beyond those circumstances. Now, I think this episode is critical for anyone who may be experiencing fatherhood, perhaps sooner than planned, or anyone who is struggling to find their way as a dad. We outline the importance of who we surround ourselves with, what we allow to have our attention, and how we choose to expend our energy. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Tamien Dysart. Tamien, how are you this morning? Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I am doing fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm doing outstanding. We're recording the show on a Saturday, and it is playoff weekend, and my Chiefs are playing the Colts, so I'm looking forward to that game.
Big day.
Big day. You know, not to get off topic right away, but the Chiefs don't have a great postseason history, so we'll see how they do.
That is true, but at some point, it's got to turn the tides, as is like your Boston Red Sox, and even the Cubs won. So
this is true.
At some
Miracles.
point, it's going to happen.
Yep, miracles happen. Well, I'm excited to talk to you today. I want to first kind of turn the microphone over to you and just have you kind of give your dad bio. Tell people who you are and kind of what you're doing today, and then we'll kind of dive a little deeper later on.
Yeah, so Tamien Dysart, originally from Sioux Falls, struggled for a long time to call myself a lifer given the January, February weather typically, but it's been shaping up to be improved. So over my career, I worked primarily in finance, worked for credit card collections, Capital One, Wells Fargo, etc. Been married for 12 years. A couple of years ago, I stepped out and started my own business, Think 3D Solutions. I became a dad at the ripe age of 17, and that was my first daughter, and she is now 22. And then my wife and I, we have two additional beautiful daughters, Sanaya, 10, and a 5-year-old, Amira. So kind of fooled. My official title is a princess producer. I'm surrounded by all girls, but I love it.
Girls are something else, man. I've got two of them, as you know, and they turned me into a big softie. They had me wrapped around their little finger pretty early on.
Yeah, they melt your heart.
They do. So yeah, let's dive in. Like I mentioned, I'm excited to dive into today's topic because, as you know, you and I share something in common, and that is we both became fathers at a very early age. You mentioned you were 17. I was 19. I was headed off to college, and I don't know, we're going to talk about this, Tamien, but for me personally, like that was, in hindsight, like having, now I'm 42, looking back throughout my life, like that really wasn't that difficult of a time, but at the time, that was the most difficult time in my life.
Oh, yeah.
And it was very difficult to hear the news, and to learn that I was going to be a dad before I'd even started college, but then to have to tell my parents, and then to live with that reality that, like, all your friends are going to go off and do their thing, and you're sort of thrust into manhood, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So walk us through, you said you were 17 years old, extremely young. Yep. Walk us through that. How did your family accept the news, first of all?
So, yeah, I had been dating this girl kind of off and on for about a year. Obviously, naive and wasn't being protected when we were um, partaking in adult activities.
Yeah, easy to do.
And yeah, very easy to do. Never had the talk in terms of all that type of stuff. And so you just kind of get thrust into that. It was my 17th birthday present of finding the news out.
Oh, wow.
Personally, yeah. So she called me on my 17th birthday, which is May 5th, and I'm pregnant. And just that world just closes in, and you're like, oh my God, what next? And it's kind of funny that her dad, who wouldn't live with her, but he had found out via a false rumor, which was funny. It was like how it got started. Someone had spread a false rumor because only two people knew, and had gotten back to him. Well, anyway, he ends up confirming with her. And then I remember vividly the call when he called the house, and I answer, and he's like, "Is your dad there?" And it's one of those like longest moments. You yell for your dad to get the phone, and you're just like, "Oh God," And so you just kind of waiting for that call upstairs, and this yell came, and it was just the longest walk up the stairs. And is it true? Yep. And okay. So we had the big family meeting. My parents, her mom, and then her dad and stepdad, who wasn't really active in her life per se, but again, still were there. And so it was kind of that decision, like, what do we do? Do
Right.
we, you know, is there an abortion? Do you move forward? And so just that kind of family decision. And so they accepted it hard. My parents, my mom specifically, was, just really concerned, like having a kid at this age, what's that going to do to your life? So they took it I was hard. I mean, again, what I think to some degree, I could put myself in the shoes if my child had a child being a child at 17.
Mm-hmm.
You would kind of feel not just disappointed in them, but as yourself, you reflect back, like, what did I do wrong?
Absolutely.
In that space. So there's a lot of concern. And then, again, this my mom just being a parent, I wanted to make sure that it was mine, and all those different things. And so, yeah, it was tough at first. And what are you going to do for a job? We're going to go to college, all those things. And
Yep.
so,
yeah, I can absolutely totally relate to all of that. I remember one of the hardest parts for me was my first visit to my girlfriend's house at the time. She's now my wife, but my first visit over to their house and having to face her parents face to face for the first time. And man, you just wish you could just crawl into a hole. But again, I mentioned you're sort of thrust into manhood, and that was one of those first instances where, I knew that I had to face this thing head on like a man, because like it or not, I am a man now. And I don't know about you, but like I knew that I was not done developing. Like I said, I was only 19. I knew I had a lot to learn. Of course, at that age, you feel sort of invincible and like you do know everything. But when you're thrust into that type of situation, deep down that I'm not ready for this. And so I knew there were some things that I needed to do in my life to step up and grow up. And I didn't know exactly what those things were at that time, but I kind of figured it out as I went along. But taking a look back at your situation, at that time, and I think the answer to this is kind of obvious, but did you think that you were the man you needed to be in order to be a good dad, or not at that time?
At that time, it was one of those things, like, I was really naive, because you're not, I mean, again, when you're a child still, I mean, I'm in high school, I'm still, you're still dependent on your parents. And so you give no thought to any realities of life. I mean, you're not paying any of your own bills, just everything's kind of being given to you. And so along the way, we went, I think after the news, we had split up. Just knew it wasn't going to work between her and I. And we had went like 6 months prior to contacting her, and then talking. And then I had, looking back, I know I always had intentions of being there. But again, just in that immature high school stage, it's just like you kind of just separate. And then I got a call, I think the week prior to, hey, I'm having a baby next Monday, a C-section, so you show up. And so I think on the process for me, I was just naive. It was just one of those things I didn't step back and think about any of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still going to school. So again, I'm just still having to finish high school. And so at that time I was getting her every other weekend when she was first born, and then, it's like you're not together. And so what do you do? And so I think there was a bit of benefit in that naivety of it. Like, so the gravity of the situation didn't really hit me because you're just going through it. And so I think a lot of that being early and young, it was just not so much, I didn't have much reflection. It just did. And I think I was reflective enough to know that I knew I wanted to be a better dad. And to me, again, I always say good parenting is this. It's taking the good that your parents did and repeating it. And then the areas that you wish they would have changed, change it.
Right.
And that doesn't make you perfect, but that makes you a step better. And that to me is good parenting, because there's no book to perfect parenting. And so along the way, again, after I graduated, I started getting more time with her. And then very, very quickly, we were splitting custody 50-50. And so I just realized, again, I had to be very intentional about my time with her. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed, taking her to the movies, enjoyed those things. And so at that moment in my life, again, I think being early 20s, for most people, they don't do a lot of reflection. It just is what it is. And so that with that first go around with Destiny being, it was about 11 years difference until I had my next daughter. I didn't have a whole lot of reflection, but I knew I had to grow in that space in general.
Was there was that realization? Did it happen quickly, or is it more of a long drawn out process?
Well, I think, Mark, it comes with maturity. So you get to a certain place. So again, as I kind of got into a career, and when I look back on when I had my second child, I was 29. And so at that point in life, in that stage in your 20s, you're starting to figure life out a little bit, right? You start to figure out responsibilities, and then you start to develop a career path and those things. And so by its nature, for most people, when you get reflective about what I want to do with my life, my career, how to be a better husband, all those different things where you start to really think about that, you start to develop some more understanding and intention. Fortunately for me, the changing point or turning point in my life was when I was 21. I had kind of given my life to Christ and found God. And so that journey set me up to become more mature as a person. That then eventually made its way down to when I got married and had my next child, being more intentional with that. I really got big into self-development. So I was reading all kinds of books. And so you sprinkle books in there about just being a good man and being a leader and all those various things. And so that kind of sprinkled together to say, how do I be a better dad? And slowly but surely just make some of those tweaks to, ask yourself, am I doing a good job? If I say where I'm not doing a good job, what things can I do to improve?
You touched on an important point there that was kind of the whole purpose of this podcast, actually. And that's, the fact that you were saved, right? You accepted Christ into your life at 21. I grew up in the church, and I can't really pinpoint an age or a day or a year when I accepted Christ into my life. He was always part of my life. It really wasn't until I was probably in my late 20s when it really clicked with me that you got to have more than just head knowledge about the Bible and what it says about your life and how to lead your life. But it really comes down to having a personal relationship with Christ. And it was when that clicked for me that I began to not just reflect differently upon my life, but think about the future of my life differently, knowing that I had a divine purpose as a father. And that really sparked me to be more intentional in how I spent time with my kids. It just changed the way I visioned my own life and, relationally, financially, spiritually. And it really helped me develop my approach to fatherhood. And it sounds like that was maybe similar to you. What led you to Christ in the first place?
So I never grew up in the church. We went a couple times, but again, nothing that stuck at that point. My parents weren't going. And so there was just no connection to God in that manner. It's one of those things that I know very clearly now. When my grandmother passed, when I was in my 20s, at that point I was full on into church and had found God and so on and so forth. And I shared a scripture at her funeral, and about, it said, blessed are you when your grandchildren are blessings. Again, that just kind of reflects back on your grandparents of, when your grandchildren are a blessing. And I shared that. And my great aunt came up to me afterwards at the funeral, and she said, you didn't know this, but when you had destiny at 17, she said, your grandmother prayed for you feverishly, like daily, because she was concerned, how was Destiny going to know Christ because we weren't married, and this wasn't that structure there. So out of all her grandchildren, I know I received the most prayer, and that I know that was God then working in to kind of divinely to say, okay, reaching down and touching my life. And so directly, I actually had fallen on just depression. I was in a deep state of depression. I had friends, the world's money, chasing money, chasing women, chasing alcohol and drugs, those type of things. And it was funny, God used a woman at the time to get me into church. So I was talking to this girl at the time, and we were just friends at the time, but I just was in depression. And she said, come to church with me. And I was like, what do I have to lose? And it was one of those moments that you hear a lot of times where those first like 5 sessions or first 5 times I went, it was like I was the only person in church because that message was for me.
Yeah.
And it was God speaking to me, and it was one of those things. And from there, it was a slow journey, but it was the beginning of my journey. And so that's kind of how I came to accept him. And again, once you get a taste of, you definitely knew what the world was like because I was full into it. When you get a taste of something good, you're like, okay, I don't know all the way what this is, but this tastes exponentially better than everything that I've experienced up until this point.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's a key message for anybody listening to this particular show who maybe finds themselves in a similar situation, thrust into manhood because you're became a dad maybe earlier than you had planned, or maybe you know somebody in that situation. Integrating Christ into your life and letting him lead it's a make or break deal. I mean, it's like I said, it changed my life. It changed how I approached parenthood. It impacted you, Tamien. I think for the guys out there listening to this, you've got so many pressures from the outside world telling you, that you should be, like you said, Tamien, chasing your career, chasing money. There's lots of temptations when it comes to partying and, feeding your heart and your brain with content that does not do you any good. And when you are willing to accept the fact that what the world is trying to feed you and tell you and how you should be a dad and be a man is completely wrong, and what Christ has to say for you in the Bible is right, and you're willing to at least give it a try, you're going to be blown away with the direction that's provided for you and your family and the impact that it's going to have, not only for you personally, but how your family members in turn are going to be impacted as well. So I'm curious, Tamien, when you accepted Christ in your heart and you grew in your faith, your daughter Destiny was still pretty young at that time, but did you sense a change in her at all, or what do you think her perception of that change in you was? Do you think that she recognized it?
Yeah, no. So she was only a few years old when we started going to church, and so again, she didn't know any difference, I think, in particular at the moment. When I made that change, again, you start to just surround yourself with different people. You start to be in different circles. You start to really, as you touched on, expose yourself to different things. And I think that environment, grew up. And I know you probably can relate to this as well. When you, as it says in the Bible, Proverbs 22:5, raise your child in the ways of the Lord, and they will not depart from his path, right? And with her, that actually became very true. So she was then kind of raised in the church, and she saw the example that I had. And I was in a scenario where, again, we were as a 2-parent household, and a lot of times that's obviously not ideal. And where her mother wasn't, she loved her, but it wasn't the greatest parent. And some of the things that either lack of engagement or whatever the case is, that in hindsight turned out to be a huge advantage in terms of she saw a very contrasting difference.
Mm-hmm.
where that came into play when she early teenage years, when she hit that 14, 15 age, where a lot of people, dread that age,
Yep.
she started coming over less. She started, dad had rules. I had to put my phone down by 9 o'clock at mom's house. I don't have a bedtime. And
Mm-hmm.
so less and less wanting to come over. And that was probably the hardest 2 years of my life, because she was my princess, and I spent that time with her. But then she came out of it, and I think through that, and she realized again, the people that she was hanging around was very reflective of the other side of life that she was seeing, and she started seeing that wasn't a good thing. And I never wavered. I just stayed consistent to my rules. I wasn't going to be swayed by that, and that's where, kind of back to what you had said about the power of having a relationship with Christ, and especially the Bible, which the acronym that I heard someone say one time is basic instruction before leaving Earth.
Yep.
BIBLE. And in that space, like, that's your instruction manual. And again, I didn't have a blueprint of being a good dad, but God is the perfect father. And so as I've modeled those things, she came back around, and I've been able to see it kind of full circle now that she's 22. She's, she has been for the last 4 or 5 years, like, back into the church. She's trying to pull her friends into it. So
Mm-hmm.
back to your original question, I think, or statement of curiosity is I think, they do see that, they do see, the characters, if you're truly living that, and they see that's good fruit. And so as they start to ask themselves questions as they go into early adulthood, and they start to be curious about, is this the right way? What's the right way for me? They recognize, well, again, dad's, he has a good life. Has peace. He's not dealing with all kinds of drama. Maybe I should follow in the footsteps that he's taught me and he's walked. And then I too will have that as a baseline for my life.
Yeah, it's a good reminder for any parent, really, that your kids, no matter how old they are, even when you think they're too young to really understand what's going on, they are a sponge and they're soaking it all in, good and bad. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. If they see you modeling good behavior, good choices, that might not come to fruition in their lives right away, but it is getting embedded in their memory banks, and they will come back around to that eventually, and recall that and remember that, dad kind of maybe knew what he was talking about when it came to this and that. And so, yeah, it's a good point to remember. Another reason, Tamien, I wanted to have you on this show is that, we do share this similar pasts, becoming fathers at a very early age, but you have thrived not only as a dad, but as a leader and a person in the business community. And so you've definitely overcome any obstacle and statistic that may have been in your way when it came to, being a dad at 17 years old. And I think in terms of my personal circle, you're near the top when it comes to being a thought leader in the realm of personal and professional growth. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper into, like, some of the tactics that you employ into your life to not only sharpen your axe, but keep it sharp. Not just from a leadership standpoint, but biblically and spiritually as well. What are some practical things that guys can put into their daily routine to really step up and out of the chaos of the world and really hone their skills and grow deeper in their relationship with Christ and become a better leader and a better father?
Well, I think one of the keys for me is always, and actually this word has resurfaced in the last, as I ended out 2018 and going into this year, and then I'm just seeing tremendous benefits from it, but it's the word clarity. And you think about, like, some of the most successful people in the world, like, clarity is in their top 3. And you can apply that to anything, but you then ask yourself what things go into having clarity. You have to have a mindfulness of where you are, a mindfulness of where you want to go, a reality of what it's going to take to get there. And I think for me, I also count the cost. I found, so I had that moment where, again, when I got into the, that corporate ladder and was working, I was grinding 60 hours a week and, doing all of that. I really stepped back and it started hitting me a little bit early when I heard about 8 years ago, you started hearing the folks talk about, what would you say at your funeral,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of determines what kind of man you want to be. And you kind of work your way backwards. And I was really challenged in that because as I got deeper in reflection, I think one of the practical things for all of us and every single person has to do is you have to do a deep dive into your history, into who you are, what things good and bad happened to you. And then, again, for me, I was able to realize that here's some things that weren't, and again, no shots at my parents because they did the best they could under the circumstances, if you would. But being aware of those things, I had to ask myself, am I unintentionally passing these things down to my children? Or, again, if I'm working so hard, because, a lot of people say, oh, I'm doing it for my kids and my family. When a lot of these kids, like, I don't want the money. I don't want the trips. I want you, Dad. And it's easy to get caught up in that, especially being males. Men, we're wired to conquer. We're wired to protect. We're wired to be the providers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy to fall into that trap. And so I've been aware of, like, really asking myself, from the love languages, even of like, what do my children really need from me, and balancing that out. So I think practically it's been getting clarity has been huge for me. Another thing that I've really adapted in the last couple of years is really, there's no perfect path for any person to follow, right? So you can't, other than Jesus, obviously, but in that space, when you think about exposure, I call it principle of exposure, that in which you're exposed to influences who you become. And so really asking yourself, like really doing a full evaluation of your weeks, like 168 hours, what are you listening to? Who are you surrounding yourself with, et cetera? And if you really want to be better in any field, if it's being a better dad, being a better business leader, you have to ask yourself, what are you being influenced by, or what are you inputting yourself into? And so I'm a huge reader. Again, if I'm investing into myself, I can't help but that information spilling over and making me better in my life. As of recently, like, again, if you, a lot of people, I don't have time. Well, you can get audiobooks, and actually you could speed up audiobooks up to 3 times as fast. Now it takes a lot to get there. I've been listening to YouTube videos on 2 times the speed, and so I'm doubling the time. And so what's been awesome about that is, again, just saying there's no excuses in our day and age with technology that you cannot find. Again, if you can't find 20 to 30 minutes every day or every other day to invest in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
then you really can't expect to grow. And so one of my favorite quotes comes from Les Brown, he was a famous motivational speaker. He said, want shows up in conversation, expectation shows up in behavior. Everybody loves to sit around and talk about it. It's fun to talk about the thing or who I want to be. But if you show me your calendar, which shows me your behaviors, I'll show you what you expect to be. And so you can't expect to be a better father, a better husband, a better man, a better leader if you don't have the behaviors that invest that back into you. And so through doing that, we're all going to get the nuggets. We're going to get exposure. And then I would say third, one thing I'm pushing myself to is I'm creating small pods of people I'm circling, my circle of influence of people that I'm around. So I have a very specific set of friends that we just hang out. I have a very specific set of people that I'm mentoring and pouring back into. I have a set of thought leaders that I hang around. And so I have very intentional groups versus
Mm-hmm.
just the same people all the time that can help round me out and make me sharper in a lot of ways, which I love what you're doing here. Again, this could build, I believe this is going to build into a community of, again, genuinely really great dads. And we as dads are such a huge key of setting the example of our families and our children in that manner.
Yeah. Well, that's the goal. Tamien, those 3 points are just awesome. And they really reflect really the principles behind the Inspired Legacy, which I've dived into in our blog in some detail, and that's really focuses around your time, attention, and your energy, which you kind of touched on. And we've kind of danced around this throughout our conversation. Your effectiveness as a father and a leader in general is so influenced by how you spend your time and who you surround yourself with and how you spend your energy. And we're going to make sure this is all outlined in the show notes, because this is such a powerful takeaway from this discussion, that if you're not focused, if you're not exposing yourself to the right things and surrounding yourself with the right people, you're going to get sucked down the rabbit hole of being influenced by the wrong things like we've talked about. And so, yeah, dads out there, just keep this in mind. You should maybe bookmark this episode because there's a lot of key takeaways here. Tamien, I really want to thank you for your time today. One question I like to ask everybody, and you kind of danced around it a little bit already, but the term legacy is really a hot topic these days. And it was one of the things that kind of inspired our brand, so to speak. But when you couple it with the word inspired, and you say that phrase, the inspired legacy, what does that mean to you? What is your definition of an inspired legacy?
It's funny that you asked that. I just went through kind of a rethinking of what is my purpose, and part of my purpose in life is to engage in it wholeheartedly, but I want to embrace, impact, influence, and inspire the world to maximize its fullest potential. And there's a lot in that fullest potential. When I think about, actually, I have one of those little placards that has the word inspire, which is defined as to encourage someone to greater effort, enthusiasm, or creativity, or to awaken a particular feeling in somebody. And in Latin, that's, to breathe into. And so to me, an inspired legacy is to really, again, when you're looking at the people that you have the privilege and honor of being a part of their lives, and having a chance to just pour into somebody or plant a seed in someone, don't overlook those moments, because we all have heard the stories of people on their deathbed. They look back and they never regret. It's not the things that they did and the mistakes they made. It's the things they didn't do, spending more time with their children or spending more time with friends and family members. So to me, an inspired legacy, it starts with intention. Again, one of the things that actually our pastor Dwana, she did an exercise a couple of years ago that really stood out to me, and it was she gave a sheet that had 52 boxes across and 85 boxes long, and said, fill in how many weeks that you've been here on this planet. And as I'm about to turn 40 here this year, a lot of people hit 40 and hit this midlife crisis. And when you do that, and it was such a freeing exercise, because I've only lived 40 years. And I look at all these unchecked boxes that were remaining on this sheet, and I'm like, that's like a whole ton of boxes of weeks that I could actually make an impact on somebody in someone's life. And so having that end goal mindset, and some gal I was talking to recently, she said, what is your retirement speech? Because sometimes it's kind of morbid when you think about your deathbed speech, if you would, or what's said at your funeral. But even your retirement speech is as a benchmark, what do you want people to say about you? And so when you think about what kind of impact that you want to have, and then working that way backwards, is say, how can I live every day working towards that? Not trying to get there overnight, but just simply saying, how can I become the next version of myself? And so that's kind of my goal every year. I look at to say, what is that 40-year-old version of me, of Tamien? And so every year I'm challenging myself to grow into that next version of myself. And if I can just focus on doing that year after year, I'll look back with an inspired legacy that I was able to touch the lives of millions of people.
Powerful. That's awesome. Maybe the best answer I've had yet. Tamien, we touched on Think 3D. Just in the next couple minutes here, just give us a brief overview of what that is and what you guys do, and tell us where we can find you online.
Yeah, so Think 3D, you can find us at letsthinkthreed.com, as well as Instagram and Facebook. Our purpose is, we believe we can help better the world by improving the way people live through improving the way people work. And so when you think about the average person spends somewhere between 50 and 75% of their waking hours at work, going to work, talking about work. We know our best chance of having better families, better communities starts at the workplace. And so we do leadership development and training to help improve organizational culture and instill and inspire leadership within people so they become their best selves as people first. That makes them a better employee and a better business.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know you guys are doing great work out there. Tamien, thanks again. I feel like we scratched the surface on a lot of different areas here. I would love to have you back where we could maybe dive into one of these a little bit deeper. A lot of powerful thoughts here. Really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Tamien. That was just chock full of really good nuggets. I especially like the practical tactics that dads can employ into their own lives that really sharpen our axe and keep it sharp so that we can ultimately be the best leaders and dads that we can possibly be. If you guys took anything away from this episode, would you consider doing me a favor and subscribe to this podcast? Also, leave a 5-star review. That really helps us get noticed in iTunes. But most importantly, if any of this specific message today resonated with you, or if you know anybody out there who could benefit from what we talked about, would you share this episode with them? If you guys would like to follow this show online, you can visit theinspiredlegacy.com, and there you're going to find links to our Instagram and Facebook pages. And if you're looking to keep your axe sharp by surrounding yourself with other like-minded dads, very similar to the message that we talked about today in the show, I would invite you to join our free and private Facebook group. It's full of guys who offer encouragement, support, and accountability and spiritual growth, and there's a link to that group in the show notes. Again, I want to thank you guys for listening. Remember, subscribe, leave a review, and share this message, because again, I really do believe that when we all work together to lift up fatherhood, we're going to change the world one dad at a time. Until next time, live inspired.